Today at the National Press Club, Australian Olympic Committee CEO Matt Carroll. As preparations continue for the 2032 Olympics in Brisbane, he'll outline the investment in sport needed to create a lasting legacy for Australia. Matt Carroll with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club, here today in Canberra for the Westpac address. My name is Julie Hare and I'm the Education Editor at the Australian Financial Review and a Director here at the club. Our guest today is the Australian Olympic Committee CEO Matt Carroll with his address titled Sport Investment in Australia, the Key to Success for Brisbane 2032 and Beyond. Matt has been in and around sport and its administration almost his entire adult life. His first love is rugby, a sport in which he's been deeply involved in both state and national levels and World Cup levels during the 1990s and 1900s. Sorry, Matt.
At all.
And the early 2000s. Before doing the unthinkable and switching codes to football, you know, that game with the round ball. When in 2004 he became the inaugural General Manager of the Football Federation of Australia. In 2017 he was appointed CEO of the AOC with the massive task of overseeing the next Paris Olympics, the LA Olympics, and then Brisbane in 2032. So while his original university degree might have been in construction, no doubt with an eye of getting into the family business, Matt has been building things in his entire life, just not in bricks and mortar. Please welcome, you can follow the conversation on Twitter at PressClubAust or hashtag NPC. Please welcome Matt Carroll.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining and attending today. I greatly appreciate it for the important role that sport plays in Australia's communities. May I start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend the respect to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, as well as the 60 known Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Olympians who have represented our nation at the Olympic Games. In doing so, may I also recognise the Indigenous Olympian Patrick Johnson, Chair of the AOC's Indigenous Advisory Committee, and committee members Kyle Vanderkite and Becky Smith, who are with us here today as well. As already noted, there's been a few apologies, so I may also acknowledge the representatives from the Olympic and Paralympic sports. I won't go through that very long list, universities and government. And importantly though, and he's been mentioned, and yes, he really wants to do the job, Andrew Liveris, the President of the Brisbane 2032 Organising Committee. Catherine Clark, the CEO of Paralympics Australia, and Ben Houston, the President of Commonwealth Games Australia, and most importantly, all the Olympians in the room. Just over 4 years ago, I spoke here at the National Press Club and unveiled a new direction for the Olympics in Australia, a direction that has delivered significant progress on our role to provide athletes the opportunity to excel at the Olympic Games and to promote the values of Olympism and the benefits of participation to sport for all Australians. All in keeping with our vision to inspire Australians through the spirit of the Olympic sport. Through this work, we are fulfilling our obligation as a National Olympic Committee to the Olympic Charter to build a better world through sport. However, achieving our objectives in partnership with our member sports is getting harder. Last week, I attended, along with more than 500 people of all ages and from all sectors of the community, the Brisbane 2032 Legacy Forum. Enthusiasm abounded. Hopes and dreams for our country were bounced around the room. Sadly, many may remain just dreams. Why? Well, 4 years ago, I spoke right here about the chronic decline in the strategic government investment in Australian sport and the opportunity to arrest that decline for the good of the nation. I did say at the time that turning around the decline was a long game, but we are now deep into the second half and sadly the score is going the wrong way. Our analysis, undertaken in conjunction with our member sports, show that based on the federal government's forward estimates, there is a $2 billion shortfall in direct investment in Olympic, Paralympic and Commonwealth Games sports in the 10 years leading into Brisbane 2032. You're right, $2 billion. As the Australian Olympic Committee and Commonwealth Games Australia stated in Sport, Powering Australia's Future 10+10, our submission to the federal government's 2021 intergenerational report, successive national sport plans under successive national governments of different political persuasions have done nothing to address the investment in sport to achieve opportunities for Australian community that they identified in their own plans. The plans were without a means. At best, you could call them aspirational plans. Without investment, what governments in Australia want sport to achieve for the community is not going to happen. And in all honesty and openness, unless the situation is rectified, Australia will be staring failure in the face of the 2026 Commonwealth Games and the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, because our home teams will have been undermined by inaction. Time starts now. The AOC fully understands the pressures on the federal budget to address the cost of living for many Australians. The AOC is not seeking any federal government funding for itself. We never do. The solution I will offer today are all about investment in our sports and their athletes and the net return to the Australia on that investment. But let's take a look at the scoreboard. The Olympic movement has not been idle, and the AOC has and continues to invest in sport. Starting with the Olympic teams, through the hard work and dedication of member sports and the skill and determination of their athletes, the AOC delivered an Australian team to Tokyo 2020 that was record-breaking. 486 Australians competed, with female representation accounting for 54% of the team, a record for Australia, and a record 16 Indigenous Australians represented. Australia was placed 6th on the medal table. We equalled our best gold medal count with 17 gold. Add a further 7 silver, 22 bronze, and it was our second best medal count ever. All came home Olympians, 99 with a medal, all an inspiration to Australian communities, a return on investment. 6 months later, with the pandemic still on, this time with the outstanding preparation by our winter member sports and their athletes, we took an Australian team of 43 athletes to Beijing for the Winter Games, 22 women and 21 men, our third largest Winter Olympic team ever. The team secured Australia's greatest ever Winter Olympic medal count with 4 medals, 1 gold, 2 silver and 1 bronze, a return on investment. The combined investment by the AOC in both teams, plus youth and regional games over the 4 years, was $35 million, paid for by our commercial program with our sponsors, IOC grants, our Olympic Foundation and state government donations of $3 million. 4 years ago, I unveiled our signature community program, Olympics Unleashed. Since that time, through our partnership with the state and territory governments in Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Western Australia and here in ACT, 245 athletes have visited 2,128 schools, spoken to 283,000 students, telling their stories to the students about what they've learned during the twists and turns of their career. Olympics Unleashed has also supported Olympians and future Olympians with the presentation, training and payments, which to date totaled $750,000. Another of our critical activations is Australian Olympic Changemaker, now in its 5th year. This recognises students who are demonstrating the Olympic spirit, friendship, sportsmanship and striving for excellence through leadership, challenging students to be the change. I'm proud to report that to date 4,000 Year 10, 11 and 12 students right across Australia, from Thursday Island to Launceston, Perth to Dunedin, are driving positive change in their schools and local communities. In talking with the students each year, they give me great hope for the future of our country, and it will be in safe hands. In February this year, we recognised the first Australian Olympic Pathway School in New South Wales, possibly a world first. Recognition builds pride in the students and families and shines a light on the schools for providing the vital pathway that aspiring Olympians, more schools to come. In keeping with our commitment to practical support for Indigenous reconciliation through sport, and in partnership with Paddy Mills, Indigenous Basketball Australia and Toyota Australia, we delivered a pilot program of scholarships for Indigenous coaches. We'll be extending that in the coming years. In celebrating the 60 Indigenous athletes known to have represented Australia at the Olympic Games, the Australian Olympic team uniform proudly features Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art. A special cultural centre is now part of the Australian allotment in the Olympic Village, and athlete-centred Walk With Us forums are an annual occurrence. In this way, the Australian Olympic team proudly showcases our cultural heritage to the rest of the world. Our investment in community engagement with our partners now totals $12 million over the 4 years to Paris 2024. As we head towards 2032, the AOC is committed to increasing the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Olympians, creating inspiring leaders for Indigenous communities. In doing so, and again in conjunction with our member sports, we aim to increase the number of medals won by our Indigenous Olympians, currently 15, 11 women and 4 men. At the centre of everything we do are the Olympians and athletes aiming to become Olympians. The AOC is delivering programs focused on health and wellbeing, post-competition careers and personal brand management, as well as supporting member sports in their athlete-related services. These support services and direct funding to athletes over the 4 years to Paris totals more than 18 million. On the international diplomacy front, and on behalf of the Australian Government, in 2020 and 2021, the AOC managed and delivered a comprehensive sport projects assisting the athletes of the National Olympic Committees of Oceania and the Oceania Paralympic Committee to prepare for the Tokyo Games. The success of the program was best summed up by the Secretary-General Tuvalu Olympic Committee from the world's smallest sovereign country. The biggest achievement of this support was making the impossible possible. Without this support, we could not have made it to the Olympics. While this project was the first of its kind in partnership with the Australian Government through Department of Foreign Affairs, we consider this projects and like these are just the tip of the iceberg for the Olympic movement can do for sport diplomacy outcomes in the Pacific. And indeed, this is what this theme has been adopted for the relaunch of the Parliamentary Friends of the Olympic and Paralympic Movement in Australia, taking place this evening in Canberra, Brisbane 2032, a decade of sports diplomacy across the Pacific. Staying with the international context, the tragic events in Afghanistan in 2021 saw the AOC, with diplomatic support from the Australian Government, evacuate athletes, sport officials and their families safely into Australia where they continue to contribute to sport. Many of these people were in critical danger of being killed. Some had been tortured in front of their family. 31 people now call Australia home as a result of this endeavour. So when we talk about the power of sport to change lives, there can be no better example than this. In December 2020, the AOC became a signatory of the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Framework, acknowledging the active role that sport can play in delivering sustainable operations for the benefit of the environment. We have initiated our own climate action plan, setting out AOC's commitment to a 30% reduction in its emissions by 2024, 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2040. Our relationship with the Australian Sports Commission, the Australian Institute of Sport and the state and territory institutes and academies has never been stronger. We contribute to their strategic plans and support their submissions to governments throughout the country. I'm a member of the leadership group of Australia's High Performance 2032 Sport Strategy. The same with our colleagues at Paralympics Australia and Commonwealth Games Australia. These activities I just outlined are a substantial investment by the AOC and our partners. We do them because, as we say to our young change makers, be the change. But sport can do so much more. The AOC and our member sports and Olympians make up the Olympic movement in Australia. And along with Paralympics Australia and Commonwealth Games Australia, we all want to put sport at the service of the Australian community. But to do so, we need a strong and receptive partnership with the federal government. As I mentioned earlier, in May 21, in partnership with Com Games Australia, we produced a 10+10 submission. Notably, this was the first time sport had ever prepared a submission for consideration by the federal government's formulation of an intergenerational report. The 10+10 submission advocates for the sports industry to be embraced by governments in Australia as an economic portfolio. We do not want to be the portfolio of marginal seats and political photo opportunities. We do not enjoy being the portfolio of coloured spreadsheets or whiteboards mapping electorates. As an industry sector, we are fiscal contributors to the nation's wellbeing through this critical role sport plays in our collective health, addressing the nation's obesity crisis, chronic disease, mental health and personal development. All issues called out almost daily by government, media and industry as critical to the productivity of Australia's economy. Sport can deliver. In addition, sport delivers economic building major events, tourism, hospitality, infrastructure, research, and something that is most important, sporting excellence, building national pride and international status. The submission was well received by the then government and the opposition, with those roles now reversed following last year's federal election. Later that year, Brisbane was elected host of the 35th Olympiad by the International Olympic Committee. On the 11th of April 2022, Victoria was elected as host of the Commonwealth Games 2026. So now the recommendations set out in the 10+10 submission carry even greater weight in order to realise the unique opportunities presented by the decade-long green and gold runway and the 10 years after. Brisbane 2032 is an accelerator of what should happen anyway. Add Victoria 2026 and the other 30 or more international sporting events, we have turbocharged opportunity for Australian sport to deliver for the Australian economy and community. So how do we make this happen? For the AOC, this means a greater focus on a partnership with government and a new way of managing and delivering government investment in sport. Framing our approach is the AOC's role and philosophy that we provide encouragement and support to all 44 of our member sports on the Olympic program. With the proper resources and support, they are each capable of success not measured by medals alone, but also in their ability to deliver on the outcomes I've already outlined. This broad-based approach ensures that the potential for our sports to succeed is not cut off, and that no individual athlete or team is denied the opportunity to achieve representation at the highest international level of competition. Remembering Olympic, Paralympic and Commonwealth Games sports appeal to a wide demographic of our multicultural nation, gender balanced, many for decades, and inclusive of all. An example of what I'm speaking about is the experience of the Australian men's indoor volleyball team, the Volleyroos. Volleyball is one of the world's largest sports, 221 nations, 800 million participants. In 2019, the Volleyroos had qualified for and competed in the World Volleyball National League, ranked as high as 13th in the world, and finished second in the Asian Volleyball Championships, constantly defeating China, Korea, Iran and Japan during this period. With limited Olympic places, they just narrowly missed out qualifying for Tokyo. The consequences? Well, the poor dollar-starved AIS assessed the Volleyroos as having no Olympic medal potential going forward and cut their high-performance investment of $1.4 million to zero. As a result, the Volleyroos are now ranked 39th in the world and have no prospect of qualifying for the Paris Olympics. The team faces a difficult rebuilding phase to prepare for 2032, and as the host NOC, we have guaranteed qualification for all sports. Investment in Olympic and Paralympic Commonwealth Games sports provides government with a highly structured national network of experienced and committed people, largely staffed by volunteers that reaches all corners of the country. We have more than 13 million participants, more than 50% of the nation's population. Such an investment will be far more productive and provide a bigger bang for the government's buck than any bespoke specialised program or an anti-obesity advertising campaign. The investment need will enable the sports to improve their capability and capacity to deliver on the outcomes being sought, not new one-off programs which only stretch the stressed and lean administrations and the volunteers of sport to breaking point. If government properly recognised the role of sport, and by government I mean all three tiers, local, state and federal, committing resources and investment, the governments in this country will have their agenda significantly enhanced through sport. In the federal context, to bring this partnership together, what is needed is a clear articulation of a national purpose of and for the sports industry, which clearly states where sport sits in the federal government's national priorities. A purpose that is accepted and brought into by all three tiers of government and the industry, which addresses the full spectrum of activity from grassroots to high-performance athletes and sporting organisations. To do this, a clear statement of purpose needs to be agreed by all parties. To enable a meaningful context within which government prioritises sport and how policy and investment decisions are made. The statement of purpose should be used as a reference for which all proposed policies are tested by what is really quite a simple question. Is the policy, initiative or program going to deliver against the purpose? Yes or no? As the great rowing saying goes, does it make the boat go faster? If not, don't do it. The AOC proposes that the statement of purpose encompass the following critical elements. The independence and autonomy of sporting organisations. In this sense, the Olympic movement speaks about responsible autonomy. A commitment to a diversity of sports, reflecting the multicultural nation we are and the new world we are engaging in, particularly our Asian neighbours who participate in many sports which are less traditional in Australia, such as table tennis. Commitment to sports as a great enabler for people with a disability. Commitment to sport in the school curriculum, creating a vibrant school sports system that provides children with positive and diverse sporting experiences, teaching them about the benefits of sport that can lead to lifelong sporting pursuits, enhanced academic success, as well as opportunities for talented and determined children to achieve in their chosen sport. Recognition of the positive impact of whole-of-life sport for active lifestyles, reducing disease and other negative impacts of sedentary lifestyle. as well as for the positive impact that sport has on social cohesion and mental well-being across the community. Recognition that sporting performances and the ability of sport to harness a sense of national pride can unify the country. Acknowledging that individual sports people provide inspiration in the community across countless areas of endeavour, not sport alone. For example, Paralympic athletes provide tremendous motivation and hope for many Australians living with disabilities. Indigenous athletes change the lives of kids in the communities. Our sports are here to help in closing the gap. And through our diversity, we literally have a sport for everyone. And finally, recognition that sporting organisations understand their sport business best and are well placed to develop, implement, deliver the outcomes being sought and achievement of national objectives to the benefit of the community, especially in education and health. By making this statement of purpose, both the sporting organisations and the government make a commitment, like our athletes do, to their clear and stated goals. With a clear statement of purpose, a new investment model can be developed. The current sport funding model managed by the Australian Sports Commission has been in varied but similar forms for more than 40 years. The model is based on what funds are available rather than what is optimal. Hence, it creates winners and losers, all vying for funding from an ever-decreasing pool of dollars. An example of this winners and losers model relates to the Australian women's hockey team, the Hockeyroos. In December 2021, the AIS cut the funding of the Hockeyroos, who were ranked 4th in the world at the time, by a 7-figure sum. The AIS advised reason for this decision was a determination the Hockeyroos were not a medal chance at the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. Notably, the Hockeyroos in 2022 won a bronze medal in the Women's World Cup and a silver medal in the Birmingham Commonwealth Games and are currently ranked number 3 in the world. And it's not a shot at the AIS, I assure you. A team that inspires young girls defunded, but millions of dollars were found for change rooms, grants for commercial sporting codes. Not saying change rooms are not important, but seriously, priorities? The same situation has occurred with participation investment. Just when obesity, particularly in children, is becoming an ever-increasing inconvenient truth afflicting Australian society, the Australian Sports Commission has had to scrape around for dollars to provide financial support to sports participation programs. Sure, the Sporting Schools program runs on, but it's a band-aid at best. So to state again, on the current forward estimates, the direct investment is likely to be only $0.7 billion, leaving a $2 billion shortfall in the federal government's investment in the Olympic, Paralympic and Commonwealth Games sports through to 32. This shortfall consists of $500 million for participation and $1.5 billion for pathways and performance. Therefore, the investment required from the federal government based on the work and analysis we have undertaken with our member sports through to 2032 is $2.7 billion, which is in partnership, and I stress, in partnership with the $3.2 billion investment the sports will be making directly from their own means. On an annualised basis, that's $200 million per year over 10 years. In the context of a federal budget, it's not a huge amount of money. The AOC and our member sports acknowledge that receiving government investment requires accountability, so we propose a new sport investment model to reframe the sports as true partners with the federal government, a model that will ensure a holistic, coordinated view of sport that yields measurable, objective return on investment, improves transparency, accountability and establishes a disciplined approach to the partnership between government and sport. Acknowledges that sports, like any business, are integrated operations, accepting the direct link between participation and high performance. To manage their businesses, like our sports, need to keep both parts in the same envelope, as each part benefits from, and is indeed largely dependent upon, the existence of the other. The virtuous circle: participation, pathways and performance. Facilitate investment in sports through a 4-year cycle based on these business plans that encompass the whole of their business. And they'll provide specific details in the activities and measurable performances. Ensure a coordinated engagement with other federal departments and agencies to maximise the nation's return on investment in sport and unlock value through partnerships with the Office of Women, Regional Development, Education, Health, Infrastructure, Foreign Affairs, Defence, Indigenous Australians and early childhood education and youth. And most importantly, create an alignment in the roles of government agencies, specifically the Australian Sports Commission, Sport Integrity Australia and National Sports Tribunal, to deliver value through specific services and research for sport, particularly where those services are best undertaken centrally to maximise investment and prevent duplication. The many medal-winning performances enjoyed by Australian sport over the decades have been due to the revolutionary focus on sports science, medicine and technology delivered through the Australian Institute of Sport. Through the AIS, we once led the world in this space, and the world came to us to learn. To return the AIS back to its global position, the AAC calls for increased investment in the AIS so it is the home to the best and brightest in the sports science, medicine, technology, data, all the disciplines required to support the industry. Like any industry, sport requires knowledge to stay at the cutting edge with innovation underpinning successful performance. Advances in technology and knowledge in human performance support not only elite sport, but also enhance investment participation, ensuring the fruits of performance investment propagate growth in participation. I'm talking about a whole of sport focus in a dynamic collegial environment where a special research project can be developed with universities and other institutions and brought to fruition beyond the provision of routine support to athlete performance programs. The green and gold runway we hear a lot of is not just about a series of sporting events. The runway includes the opportunity for targeting and fast-tracking research and exposing new technologies during the Games that can facilitate subsequent broader community and commercial applications. The AIS should be the CSIRO of the sport industry, backed up by the network of state and territory sport institutes and academies, with universities providing research support. Collectively, they should be harnessed as a sport industry research and development engine room, not dissimilar to how the cooperative research centres have driven innovation, change and investment in other territories, other industries for decades. Knowledge, as we know, is the great enabler. So how are we going to tie this together? In order to deliver the benefits that sport can bring to Australia and set out in 10+10, we need a change. It's not for me to tell the Prime Minister and his ministers how to structure the machinery of government. Mind you, in my role, I get lots of advice just about every day on what the AAC and sport should do or not be doing. So let's just dive in. The significant change the AAC calls for is for sport at the federal level to be elevated to its own dedicated department, just as sport has been at the state and territory level for decades. Sport is too important to be part of an omnibus or alphabet collection of other portfolios, and not as a forgotten Paul cousin hidden away in the Department of Health. In this structure, all existing agencies, Sports Commission, Integrity Australia, National Sports Tribunal, will be incorporated and continue as part of the Department of Sport, so that these agencies can provide their centralised services and research secure in their core funding. The standalone department would ensure a coordinated, clearly, whoops, I'd love it when I get myself lost, you know, I haven't, that's right, clearly reflect the importance to the nation of the Olympic, Paralympic, Commonwealth Games and major events runway to 2032 and the ongoing legacy for the decades after. Establish a direct line reporting to the Prime Minister's office. Position the Minister of Sport as a member of Cabinet, reflecting the significant contribution that sport makes to the economy, health and social wellbeing of the nation. And most importantly, align government policy and activities to optimise sport's contribution to the nation from a whole of government perspective. A dedicated Department of Sport will ensure the core aspects of the investment mechanism are addressed and achieved by enabling objective examinations of proposed investment in sport. Not just write cheques for whoever shouts the loudest for a new stadium or centre of excellence to various ministers across government and backbenchers in marginal seats. Coordinate other federal government departments and agencies and territory governments in relation to major sporting events, ensuring the benefits for hosting events are maximised. Informing and recommending to the Expenditure Review Committee and Cabinet as to the investment model and its implementation. And importantly, assessing holistic investment in the national sporting organisations through a 4-year funding cycle. Coordinating with its counterparts at the state and territory level, that does not happen as much as it possibly could, it should, to align policy and investment, and ensuring final responsibility for investment decisions in sport rests with the Minister for Sport and the ARC. Most importantly for sport, a dedicated federal Department of Sport with its own dedicated minister would enable the sport industry to have a centralised voice in government. The combination of a statement of purpose and a new investment model administered by a dedicated Department of Sport would head off situations such as where Olympic and Paralympic sports struggle to send their athletes to international competitions, requiring parents of athletes to step up with financial support, while at the same time direct grants totaling hundreds of millions of dollars are made to the more commercially enhanced sporting organisations for centres of excellence, where other government agencies, departments operate specific programs based on sport, but not necessarily with the strategic alignment to the goals of sport in Australia, in the case of sport diplomacy to sport in other nations. For an industry that brings in a return positive economic contribution to this country, with a total economic value to the national economy of approximately $83 billion, and a return to Australian communities for at least $7 for every dollar invested in sport, it's difficult to fathom why we don't have a Department of Sport already. Is clearly an opportunity gone missing thus far. Successive federal government surveys show that regardless of an individual's level of interest or commitment to sport, the Olympics, Paralympics and Commonwealth Games touch almost all Australians in one way or another. Our diversity of sports is our great strength. There is literally an Olympic, Paralympic or Commonwealth Games sport for everyone. Olympic and Paralympic and Commonwealth Games sports are played by males and females. In some sports, that's been going on for 100 years. We've known about females playing sport for over 100 years. The sport of rowing has been doing it for over 100 years. We didn't just discover them like some sports have recently. Some sports attract more women than men, and others have an equal gender balance. Most importantly, at the Games, all are equal. The sports are not just for young Australians. In some of our sports, the largest participant age group is the over 55s. One of our silver medalists at the last Games was 63. There's hope for me yet. The election of Brisbane as host of the 35th Olympiad has gifted Australia a once-in-a-generation opportunity. But simply successfully hosting the Brisbane Games is not going to deliver the community and economic benefits that can be achieved for the nation. To do this, we must have a unity of purpose that transcends politics, lobby groups and fixed thinking. We must have a unity that transforms entrenched public policy approaches and processes which have recycled systemic problems such as the increasing rates of obesity and chronic disease and declining levels of physical literacy over generations. What the AOC is proposing is new thinking and new action. It is thinking that deliberately targets investment in more active, healthier and productive population through the delivery mechanism of sport. It is thinking that understands the legacy of an active and healthier society will not be achieved without the deliberate and planned coordination of the three key drivers: organised sport, health and education. It is a thinking that knows the Brisbane Games will not be a success if the Australian teams are not successful. To ensure that once-in-a-generation opportunity of the runway to Brisbane in 2032 and the 10 years after are not squandered, we are calling for a national statement of purpose for sport, clearly establishes where sport sits with the federal government's national priorities and recognised through a national sport strategy. New sport investment model built in accountability, standalone Department of Sport, a boost in direct investment in sports to arrest the decline and significant funding increase for the AIS to make it the CSIRO of sport. And for the economic rationalists in the room and elsewhere, remember that every dollar spent on sport returns $7. That's not a bad investment, particularly in today's world. In closing, I simply note that the Olympic and Paralympic medals Australian athletes win are years in the making. They are only possible because some Australians are prepared to dream, to pursue excellence, to leave nothing to chance, and to put in the hard work and the time to be successful. For the rest of us, sports administrators, government ministers, officials, other stakeholders in sport, we must be like our athletes. We must pursue excellence, leave nothing to chance, and recognise that achieving success takes hard work and commitment. We have an opportunity to make a generational difference by forging an entirely new partnership between government and the sport industry, a partnership that will deliver for Australia well into the second half of the century and beyond. So we have done some of the thinking, we've proposed a game plan. This 26th of July marks a year to go to the Paris Olympic Games. The athletes and teams are in the preparation and qualification phase, with their sports trying to make ends meet as global inflation cuts deep into their budgets. The team size will be around 450, and while expectations are positive, the challenge is tough, as results will come down to hundredths of a second or a well-struck kick, pass or shot. The world is a competitive place. After Paris, which in our time frame is next week. The Winter Olympic team heads to Milan Cortina and a home team assembles for the Commonwealth Games in Victoria in 2026. Soon thereon follows LA in 2028. And then it's Brisbane's turn. Not really that far away if you just count the games, not the years. And as the athletes do, they just count the games, not the years. There's one certainty in all of this. The Olympic flame will be lit in Brisbane on the 23rd of July, 2032, whether we are ready or not. Thank you.
Thank you. So 6 years ahead of the, stay where you are, 2000 Sydney Olympics, a relatively modest sum of $135 million was spent on elite sports in Australia. As a result of that, I don't know if there's a direct connection, there was a medal haul of 58 medals, including 16 gold. Now you're calling for $2 billion over 10 years, including 1.5 for elite sports. Is there a direct correlation between investment in elite sports and medal hauls?
Well, certainly there's a correlation, and most importantly, that investment in performance sport, for, as you call it, the medal haul, has all the benefits that I've just gone through. So, you know, that was, the Sydney Games were 20 odd years ago now. Inflation has drawn a higher costs. The Australian team, like it was in Sydney, will be, all sports will be represented. Hence, you know, we want to see all sports participating. Our country has changed tremendously since 2000. The sporting world has changed tremendously in 2000. That investment is what is required to make it happen.
Okay. Matt Killeran.
G'day, Matt Carroll. Thanks for your time. Matt Killeran for the Courier Mail. The new idea behind the Olympic Games has a strong focus on legacy and helping the games live on that past that 2-week sporting event. So far in the lead up to Brisbane 32, there's been a lot of focus on stadiums, including $2.7 billion in the Gabba, $2.5 billion for the Brisbane Live Stadium, both of which are more than the $2 billion in additional investment you're seeking over 10 years. Is there any concern, or do the games in Brisbane need to pivot to return the focus back onto delivering legacy, whether it be in things like public transport infrastructure or direct investment in sport to increase that participation?
I think the direct investment in sport, well, I'd be standing here today whether the games were in Brisbane or they were in New York, because quite frankly, we'd be able to deliver the same outcomes. What I said before is we can turbocharge those outcomes because the games are home games, and that creates that opportunity. You talk about the infrastructure, which I appreciate that. Let's be honest, the infrastructure of the Gabba is for the AFL and cricket. The Olympics and Paralympics will use it for a month. If they could just give it a coat of paint. So it is, those sports will be the beneficiaries of a refurb of the Gabba, rebuild of the Gabba. The other facilities which they're building in Queensland, particularly the indoor sport facilities in various suburbs across southeast Queensland, Australia's fastest growing population, are needed for the people, as they did the built one for the Commonwealth Games. So this investment in infrastructure is not just for the Olympic Games. We're going to use them, but they are there for the community. And without those infrastructure builds, particularly in the community sports, we won't get what we're looking for, more kids playing sport. They've got to be able to play somewhere. Basketball had a 24% increase in numbers. There's just not enough basketball courts across this country now to look after all those kids.
Tracy Holmes.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for the speech. Sport is very important to sport, but is it trapped inside its own bubble? Given that families can't afford rent at the moment, they probably can't afford sports registrations. And yet sport constantly argues for its own autonomy, but we have a situation where that lack of oversight from external bodies means that organisations like Sport Integrity Australia don't have enough money, budget, people to handle the number of complaints that comes their way from things that go wrong with sport. So you've given the federal government a reality check today, but does sport need its own reality check?
As I said, Tracy, it is a partnership. Without that partnership, you're quite right, it won't work. So sport is making that commitment. We must be measurable. You don't take taxpayers' money as an investment into your business and not be measurable against that outcome. The same as that government puts money into lots of industries, and that must be measurable as well. So that's what we will be doing as well. And the sports CEOs are in the rooms today. I'm not saying this, we've already discussed what they have to do, and those measures are important. It's not just complaints to the Sports Tribunal, but measures in actual growing their participation base, how they're going to assist in schools. So if we increase school sport, one of the things that the school education departments tell me is getting teachers qualified to coach. So there's an opportunity therefore to get sports to assist in that process as well. But sports don't have that capability and capacity to do those things unless, like other industries, which government does, invest in tourism, invest in the sport industry. The sports are investing more than what we're asking the government for, because we know we can deliver for the country.
Thank you.
Next question, Paul Sakal.
Thanks for speaking to us, Mr. Carroll. You've spoken a couple of times about grants for major sports organisations, which seem to be very common, particularly at a state level. Doesn't look like the AFL struggle for funding at all. It strikes me that those major sports that many people in the community have a strong attachment to are able to be funded more easily because they're in people's face and voters are more aware of the needs of those sports that they watch every week, whereas the Olympics comes around once every 4 years. How do you make Olympic sports more present in the minds of everyday Australians and put political pressure on governments to fund them more regularly? And which other countries do that better than Australia does?
There's a fair bit to unpack in that question. The Olympics come around 2 years, the winters in there as well. But our sports are in the market 24/7 every day of the year. So it's only, okay, some of them get showcased at the Olympic Games, but the men's volleyball team, the women's hockey team are going about their business every day. Hockey Australia are trying to get more people playing the sport of hockey every day. That's the commitment they have made. Yes, we can showcase them through the Olympics, but they are doing it every day. Well aware of the competitive sports market in Australia. I've worked for two of the biggest sports, rugby and football, where they are commercial sports, where they generate, in the case of AFL and others, billions of dollars in broadcast revenue. And congratulations on them. And they have lots of kids playing their sports. Congratulations on them. But what I'm saying is that to make meaningful investments into sport, you can't just we'll give $100 million there and $2 million there and $3 million over there without any actual strategy to what you're doing. Because what the Olympic and Paralympic and Commonwealth Games sports get told, there is no more money. A few weeks later, as you just correctly said, as we get closer to elections, there will be a new stadium or an extension or a high performance centre for a professional way. Actually, we don't call them professional sports because our sports are professional as well. But in terms of enhanced sports with their dollars, are able to do that. Lobby groups. I mean, congratulations. I take my hat off to them. But that's what we're saying. That don't just spend money in one spot without actually thinking about the whole strategy and the investment in sport across the country. Because not everyone wants to be a rugby league player, believe it or not. There are other sports we want people to participate in, and they do. I mean, if you gone down to the table tennis down in Melbourne a few months back, late last year, it was a huge success. Huge success. A lot of people play the sports, but no one knows about. We have our partners we're working with, News Limit and others, how to push those into the public more regularly. How to stream. Water polo is a good example. They're streaming their competitions courtesy of News Limited. So there's all sorts of things we're looking at and working with our partners. I've had a discussion with Channel 9, our broadcasters of the Olympic Games for the next 10 years. What can you do to also promote the Olympic sports so that the Olympics are always on, not just every 4 years?
Can I just ask you a question on that? You say the Olympics are always on. I'm just wondering whether it's going to be on for Russia in Paris, because I understand the IOC is meeting next Wednesday to discuss the very vexing issue of Russia. Does the AOC have a position, and would your position be influenced by our government's position towards Russia?
Well, the AOC's position is that of the IOC. We, like anybody, abhor the war in the Ukraine and not just the damage to the country, but the deaths as caused of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian athletes. The AOC itself has donated over $100,000 to the Ukrainian Athlete Fund, And the IOC is doing a lot to work to ensure that Ukrainian athletes are able to get to the Olympic Games in Paris. At the same time, sport is about bringing the world together. It is not about putting the world apart. So the IOC have already said that they will look at sanctions, rules around a possible participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris Games. The reason for that is because it's not the athletes who started the war. It's not the athletes who are causing the grief and the tragedy. So there's an opportunity to bring the world together, not to drive the world further apart. When the war ends, and it will end, a lot of countries will start trading with Russia again. But the athletes from that country and Belarus and from other countries who weren't able to go to the Games, you recall the boycott of various countries in 1980, those athletes missed out. The Prime Minister at the time of Australia, actually many years later, said it was a wrong decision by the country. I don't detect any change in the government's policy here, that the Australian Olympic team, Australian Olympic Committee receive an invitation from the IOC later this year to send a team to the Paris 2024 Games, and we will be sending a team.
Thank you. Sarah Eisen?
Sarah Eisen from The Australian, thank you for your address. Just a couple, if I may. This $2 billion shortfall, how was that arrived at, if I might ask? And also, have you got the required funding for the visa processing and security arrangements needed for the Commonwealth and Olympic Games? If not, do you expect that to be in the May budget?
I'll answer the second bit first.
Sure.
No, we're not up to that stage. I did say that the Games aren't that far away, but it's not needed for the May budget for visa processing. Certainly the Commonwealth Games in 2026, that could be very much so, but I'd have to put that question to them. On the other aspect...
The shortfall,
how that's arrived at. Of your question, as I said, through our member sports, we worked with them to look at their accounts, their investment, what they needed to function over the next 10 years. They were able to map their program for their athletes, they were able to map their program for their participation growth, and that's how we came up with the number. Is
the sponsorship also of people like Gina Reinhardt something you think could play a bigger role going forwards, or are you concerned about things like sports washing when it comes to big philanthropic donations?
Well, I parked the last comment, but certainly those investments by people such as Gina Reinhardt, investments by sponsors in the sports, the Olympic and Paralympic and Common Games sports, are taking into account those numbers. Remember, I actually said there's more money being invested by the sports than there is by the government.
Thank you.
Charles Croucher.
G'day, Matt. Charles Croucher from Nine. Congratulations on the upgrade of the broadcast partnership for the next 10 years.
I won't say anything to Seven. No.
Yeah. Not here. You spoke about Brisbane not being a success unless our athletes are a success. Given the government funding priority has gone largely towards stadiums and towards investment on the ground, if those games aren't a success, will both the Queensland and federal government be to blame?
I don't like throwing blame because I'm actually a very positive person. Working in sport, if you don't remain positive, you'd probably go mad. I assure you, it's very positive. I am very sure that the governments, both the federal and state governments, not just in Queensland, by the way, this is the Games for all of Australia, and I go around the countryside and do speak to the sports and the governments in the other states and territories, and they're looking forward to the Games as well. The Australian Olympic team will take representatives from all across the country, so I'm quite sure that we will achieve what the outcome. As I said, we'd be doing this anyway if the Games were somewhere else in the world. It's just that we actually have this opportunity to turbocharge what the Games will deliver. It's not about spending more on the Games. You can actually get more out of the Games than what we're going to get. Just having a successful Games is well, not a waste of time, but it's just a good jolly. We actually have to get the investment into the sports so that we can deliver for the country the things that I've already outlined.
Thanks.
Andrew Tillett.
Andrew Tillett from the Financial Review and board member here at the club. Mr. Carroll, Some research out today showed the huge volume of gambling advertising on TV that people are exposed to, concerns about the impact that has on children, normalisation of gambling, and the suggestions that perhaps the calls for it to be gambling ads to be banned until after 10:30 at night. I was just wondering, as the head of a major sporting body in the country, what's your view on the volume of gambling ads that we have?
Well, first and foremost, the AAC takes no sponsorship from gambling. Never have and never will. And that's the same position as the IOC as well. But therefore, our policy is we don't engage. Matt Carroll's view of it, yes, I think there is a lot of advertising on TV, I must admit. But I think, as always, public opinion will start to perhaps force a bit of change in that space.
Thank you.
Next question, Joe Guelas.
Hi, Joe Guelas from AAP. Just before, when you were talking about Russian athletes, you talked about how it's really important to bring the world together, not further apart. But as I understand it, last year the AOC is adopting the rules of individual sports where they are banning transgender athletes. But given what happened last week and there was so much outpouring of support for trans people, is the AOC looking to change their position?
Each sport is developing their own program, if you want to call them rules, around being able to bring transgender into their sports. And whilst at the same time, particularly respecting, and I think the word respect is very, very important. We have to respect each other's position. So respecting women athletes, female athletes as well, that's very, very important. This requirement to ensure that transgender people have an opportunity to compete in sport is absolutely important. But we can work our way through that. I know that some of the sports have individual programs for individual athletes to be able to participate in their chosen sport. As I said, there's 44 member sports. I personally feel that we will find a sport for any transgender person for them to be able to participate and potentially become an Olympian. We can do that, and I'm sure, and I know our sports will work towards that. At the same time, respecting our female athletes.
Tim Gavel. Oh, sorry. I jumped. You go, sorry. Yep. Tim, you go, and then sorry about that, yes, Julian.
Tim Gavel, Region Media and Sport Integrity Australia, Matt. You mentioned there the green and gold runway and just how important it is to create legacies, as well as athletic performance. Do you see education around integrity issues as being of equal importance as a legacy in this green and gold runway?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if sport has no integrity, you don't have sport. And I mean that across the whole range, whether it's anti-doping or what we're just talking about there around betting and gambling. So that it is critical. And I think the sooner we can get, your organisation is already doing a lot of good work in that space with the sports, but that involvement of sport in education, I talked about sport in the curriculum. Sport can include those sorts of things. I mean, instead of a lesson, the same with the Olympics Unleashed, a message delivered by an Olympian about integrity in sport is a message that students will listen to and hear. So yes, absolutely, all those messages, including the ones I just answered before around transgender participation in sport. All those messages can be managed, particularly through our Olympians and aspiring Olympians, working closely with education. As I said, this is not just about sport. It's sport, health and education. We look at the three drivers to make the difference.
Julian Linden. Apologies, Julian.
It's all right. I had more messages about being bumped than I have about my story. Matt, thanks for the speech. Look, one of the things that you proposed there was the creation of a dedicated federal sports department, which is something we don't have at the moment. Why do you think that would be important? And given that the clock's already ticking, the green and gold runway has started already, when would you like to see that happen? And is there a point where it's just too late?
I'd like to see it happen tomorrow. I mean, I realise that's not possible, but it would be nice to say by the financial year next of 2025, 2025, at least by then. It's a while off, but it's not too far off to have the Department of Sport in place. I mean, if they can do it faster, but person, or not the Prime Minister, to make those things happen, as I said. So I'd like to see it as quickly as possible. Why is it so important? Because some of the questions there. Sport touches whole parts of society, and we can do a whole lot more. But at the moment, it's got a bit over there in the health department, and this is not knocking health departments or anything like that. A bit over there in the health department, a bit over there in the foreign affairs department. Sometimes it turns up in defence, then it turns up in tourism, then it turns up in infrastructure. There is no coordination. Federally, there is no coordination nationally. I mean, I go to a lot of forums and workshops, and particularly around 2032. And I sit there and listen to all the people, and they're all sincere, from various governments, state governments, federal governments, city councils and so forth, but everyone's doing their own thing. And it's just nice, but it's actually wasting money, it's wasting investment. We're not going to get the outcomes that we want because it's not coordinated. It drives our member sports quietly mad because they're trying to answer to many different masters, so to speak. So that what we see the importance of a department is to pull all that together. So that, yes, the Australian Sports Commission still exists, very important, and the AIS, Sport Integrity Australia, National Sports Tribunals, pull them together in a department, but have a department then pull together the states. One of the biggest investors in sport is still the local governments. It tends to be infrastructure, of course, but they do other things as well. Well, let's see if we can marshal and then get a bit coordinated about how we're investing these things so we avoid wastage or the claim that we've run out of money because we're spending it on something else.
Nick Stewart.
Canberra Times, you said that inflation is cutting into your budget. It's cutting into the budgets of ordinary Australians as well. We've got $360 billion just been allocated to defence in the long term to buy submarines. Why do you think $2 billion for you to get sports people is more important than actually defending the country?
Because that $2 billion, if you listen, I said a return on the investment will reduce the health budget, will improve productivity in the country, and allow the country actually to grow at a better rate than it did if it becomes obese, lacklustre, lacking imagination, all those things that sport brings to the community. That's the difference. So there is actually a huge return on investment to the not just to the government, but to the Australian community. That's what it's about. So it's an investment.
And our final question, Matt Killoran.
G'day again, thanks again. You talked about what you want to see, the $2 billion, the Sport Minister and Cabinet, the dedicated sports department. What time frame does this need to be taking place over, and what impact will it have if we don't see $2 billion over 10 years in May's budget, in next May's budget, and so forth?
Well, I think, as I said to the previous question from Julian, the time frame is now. Let's start now. Let's start the process tomorrow. Well, I'll give the Prime Minister a little bit longer, fair enough. He's got a few things on his plate. So, yeah, we want to get cracking this year. If the government's up for the Department of Sport, let's get cracking this year, because I'm no doubt it takes time with these things. The reason why is because, yes, as I said, the Olympic flame is going to be lit in July of 2032. It is not changing. That date will not shift. You can't put it off. It doesn't go away. Sport's not like other industries where you can say, oh, hang on, we won't launch that product. We'll just put it back for another few months or years and so forth. In the sports industry, the places I've worked, once you give them the time for the kickoff, guess what? Ready or not, you've got to be there. So we are not going to get the benefit of all the things we talked about, all those hopes and dreams of the kids and so forth up in Brisbane last week. That won't happen because no one's actually going to coordinate it all together and invest in the sports who are the ones who can make it happen. And that's the difference. So this is not just putting a hand out for money. This is actually, we're saying this is a business proposition to the government. We can do these things. And that's the difference and different approach to just getting a grant.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time today. I would like to offer you a piece of our very own gold. It's a lifetime membership to the National Press Club. And so please join me in thanking Matt Carroll.
Thanks very much.